I never imagined burying my son at just 5 years old. No parent should have to go through that. Yet, there I stood in front of Liam's small white casket, his favorite blue blanket tucked inside, because it always made him feel safe. Safe. Something I failed to give him when he needed it most. The weight of that thought hit me harder than the whispers of the people sitting behind me. They weren't just mourning Liam. They were judging me. I could feel their stares burning into the back of my head, their speculations cutting through me like daggers. Where's his wife? I imagined them asking, how could she not be here? Small towns thrive on gossip, and I knew my absence wouldn't be the only topic of conversation. Now, they had Isabella's glaring absence to feast on, but the town didn't know what had happened just minutes before I stepped into the church. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I looked at it reflexively, expecting condolences or another question about the service. Instead, what I saw froze me in place. The picture was so clear, it could have been taken moments ago. Isabella, lounging by a pool, her skin glowing under the sun. A man, younger, tan and smug, had his arm around her. A cocktail sat in her manicured hand. Below the photo, the message read, "Thought you should see what your wife is really doing today. A concerned friend." For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mind refused to connect the woman I had built a life with to the person in that picture. Isabella wasn't at an important work meeting like she had told me. She wasn't sitting beside me at our son's funeral, holding my hand. She was drinking margaritas in paradise, tangled up with a stranger. The weight of betrayal crushed me, but there was no time to process it. My mother's hand gripped my arm as she whispered, "James, you're shaking." My phone trembled in my hand until I shoved it into my pocket, hoping hiding it would make it go away. But it didn't. That image haunted me every time I blinked. Still, I couldn't break down. Not now. I swallowed the rage clawing at my throat and nodded at the funeral director. Somehow, my legs carried me to the front pew, and I sat where Isabella should have been. I kept my head high, my shoulders square, refusing to give the town the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. But my thoughts raced through the past few months, desperately trying to connect the dots I had missed. Isabella's late-night calls, her sudden work trips that always seemed urgent, the way she talked about needing space when Liam's condition worsened. I had told myself we were just grieving differently. I had been wrong. As the service began, I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms to stop myself from breaking down. The pastor spoke about Liam's love for life, his boundless energy, even during the hardest days of his illness. My chest tightened when he mentioned Liam's favorite hobby, coloring white roses with food dye. I could almost see him again, his small hands stained with blue and purple, his giggle filling the room. My eyes flicked to the bouquet on his casket, white roses as far as I could see. Isabella hated those roses. She thought they were too plain, but I insisted they weren't for her. They were for Liam. She didn't deserve to be part of this moment anyway. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Isabella. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Important work meeting. I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me? Make up for missing our son's funeral? Make up for drinking cocktails while I buried our son? Anger surged through me, burning away my grief, if only for a moment. And in that moment, I thought to myself, she has no idea what's coming. I wouldn't break down like she expected. I wouldn't be the grieving husband she could manipulate. Isabella may have abandoned us when Liam needed her most, but I would make sure her betrayal didn't go unanswered. That promise solidified as I stood to give the eulogy. I looked out at the crowd, neighbors, co-workers, family, and forced myself to speak. Every word was for Liam. Every story about his joy and strength was a vow to protect his legacy. I didn't let my voice crack. I didn't shed a tear. I saved those for later, when I was alone. Today wasn't about my pain or Isabella's betrayal. Today was about Liam. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Isabella thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. So very wrong. The reception was a performance. People offered their condolences with pitying eyes and rehearsed words, shuffling through my parents' living room as though it were some kind of show. Plates of untouched cookies and casseroles cluttered every surface. The air buzzed with whispers, the kind that made my skin crawl. Everyone knew Isabella wasn't there, and their silence spoke louder than words ever could. I moved through the room like a ghost, smiling stiffly at the neighbors, nodding at distant relatives. Their sympathy felt like an insult, not because I didn't deserve it, but because I didn't want their pity. I wanted their honesty. I wanted someone to pull me aside and admit they'd seen the photo too, that they knew what she was doing, that they knew what she had become. But no one did. Isabella's parents, Grace and Thomas, hovered near the kitchen. Their presence felt as unwelcome as their judgmental glares. They'd barely spoken to me all day, but I could feel their silent accusations. To them, I had always been the problem. I wasn't attentive enough, not devoted enough. Isabella was their golden child, and nothing she did could tarnish that image. Grace finally approached me as I stood by the mantel, staring at a framed photo of Liam. It was one of my favorites. His gap-toothed grin as he held up the results of one of his science experiments. The petals of a white rose dyed a brilliant shade of blue. His hands were streaked with food coloring. He had been so proud that day. I gripped the frame tightly, the glass cool against my palms. "James," Grace said, her voice sweet, but her eyes sharp, "you've been so strong today. It's a shame Isabella couldn't be here, but she's grieving in her own way. You know how hard this has been for her. Hard for her." My grip on the frame tightened as I turned to face her. She looked at me with faint concern, the kind that barely hid her underlying criticism. Her words felt like a slap, each one digging deeper into my growing anger. "I'm sure it has," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "Though I imagine Hawaii is a nice distraction from all the difficulty." Her expression faltered, but she quickly recovered, pressing her lips into a thin line. "James, grief makes people act out of character. Isabella needed some space. You should try to be more understanding." "Understanding?" My jaw clenched as I fought to keep my composure. She didn't know. Or maybe she did, and she didn't care. I wanted to shout at her, show her the photo on my phone, and force her to see the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away, gently placing the photo of Liam back on the mantel. My mother appeared at my side, her presence grounding me in a way nothing else could. "Grace," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I think you've said enough." Grace bristled, but she didn't argue. She retreated to the kitchen, leaving my mother and me in a heavy silence. "Don't let her get to you," Mom said quietly, her hand resting on my arm. "She's just trying to deflect. She knows what Isabella has done." That admission hit me like a punch to the gut. "You think she knows?" I whispered. "Of course she knows," my mother replied. "But she's protecting Isabella, just like always." That realization made my blood boil. It wasn't just Isabella's betrayal. It was a family affair. Grace and Thomas had likely known all along and chose to protect her instead of holding her accountable. As the reception dragged on, I retreated to my father's study, desperate for some peace. I sank into his worn leather chair, the weight of the day settling over me. My mind raced with fragments of memories, her business trips, late-night phone calls, and the way Isabella pulled away, not just from me, but from Liam. I had missed the signs, but now they were clear. I pulled out my phone. The picture of Isabella and her lover stared back at me. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. This wasn't just evidence of her betrayal. It was a reminder of what I was up against. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let her get away with this. Not after abandoning me. Not after abandoning Liam. As I sat in the dim light of the study, my anger solidified into resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice for Liam, for me, for everything we lost because of her selfishness. I would make her regret ever thinking she could betray me and walk away and skate as I read the last line of that email. It's what's best for Claire. The audacity, the betrayal. It was more than I could process in one breath. I hadn't just lost Noah. I'd lost everything I'd worked for, everything I thought I had in my marriage. Claire and her parents had schemed together, quietly setting me up as the fool. They manipulated my grief and my trust, taking advantage of the fact that I was too broken to see what they were doing. My vision blurred with rage as the full extent of their betrayal crashed into me like a wave. I had been played not just by Claire but by her entire family. They'd made me the fool while they lined their pockets, robbing me of not only my son but also my home, my dignity, and any shred of peace I had left. I slammed the envelope down on the table, my hands trembling with fury. I had enough evidence now. It wasn't just about Claire and Brandon anymore. This was bigger than that. It was about the people who had been complicit in her actions, about the family that had betrayed me in the most insidious way possible. I felt a momentary flash of guilt. Was I becoming the monster I never thought I could be? My desire for revenge was consuming me. But could I justify it for Noah? Could I really destroy the people who had already destroyed my life? But then I remembered Noah. He deserved better. I couldn't let them get away with this. Not after everything. Not after the way they had twisted my love for Claire into a game to exploit. They had crossed the line too far. I stood up, shaking the fear and doubt from my mind. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I had a choice. I could let them walk away untouched, or I could make them pay for every lie, every manipulation. Claire might have thought she could bury everything. Her marriage, her guilt, her conscience. But I wasn't going to let her. And her parents? I would bring them all down. With the envelope still in my hands, I left the study and went to my car. There was no turning back now. What had started as a desire to seek justice for my son would soon become something far bigger, a battle that would not just tear apart my marriage, but would expose the depths of the deceit I had failed to see. I wasn't going to let them win. As I drove through the quiet streets, I thought about the future. How far would I go? Could I bring everything crashing down around them, even at the risk of losing myself in the process? I didn't know. But what I did know was this. Claire and her family had made their choice. Now, it was my turn to make mine, and I would make sure they regretted it, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. These are the forged documents you tried to pass off as legitimate, Claire. The ones you thought I wouldn't notice. The ones you tried to use to sell everything my family has left. Her eyes shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't say a word. I could see her scrambling, the facade of control she had so carefully built cracking in real time. Diana, however, wasn't as quick to back down. She straightened in her seat, her posture defensive. "This is absurd," she scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "This is nothing but an attack on Claire's future, Jacob. She's been through enough. She deserves a fresh start." I clenched my fists, my jaw tight with barely contained fury. A fresh start? Off my son's death and the blood of our family? I shot back, glaring at her. "You're not just after the money. You're after everything. You thought you could pull the wool over my eyes, but I've been watching, too. I know what you've been doing, and you won't get away with it." Claire's face twisted into a mask of defiance, but I could see the cracks now. "You don't understand," she said, her voice weak as she attempted to recover. "I had to do it, Jacob. You were never going to move on. I had to. For me. For us." The word stung, but I pushed the hurt aside, focusing on the bigger picture. "No, Claire. You didn't have to do any of this. You made choices, and now you'll pay for them." I turned my gaze to the realtor, whose face had turned pale at the sight of the evidence. "I suggest you take a good look at these documents. And I think it's time you realize that whatever deal you thought you had here is null and void. This sale isn't happening. Not today. Not ever." The realtor hesitated, clearly caught between his loyalty to the clients and the undeniable weight of the evidence before him. Finally, he looked down at the papers, clearing his throat. I need to consult with my manager, he muttered, standing quickly, eager to escape the tension in the room. I didn't even acknowledge his retreat. My focus remained squarely on Claire and Diana. They were cornered now, and they knew it. Diana's attempt at intimidation faltered. She shot a glance at Claire, who was visibly shaken. "This isn't over, Jacob," Diana said, her voice taking on an edge of finality. "You'll regret this. Claire will get what she's owed, one way or another." I leaned forward, fixing her with a steely gaze. "No, Diana, you're done. This isn't about what Claire is owed. This is about what you and your daughter tried to take from me, from Noah. You won't get away with it." Claire stood up abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. "You've ruined everything," she spat. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed." "Sacrificed?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think you sacrificed anything? You took from me, from our son, from the life we had. This was never about sacrifice. This was about you getting what you wanted at any cost, no matter who you destroyed along the way." Her eyes blazed with fury, but the cracks in her armor were widening. I could see it. She knew she was losing, and every attempt to fight back only dug her into a deeper hole. The realtor returned, his face drawn, as though he had received a stern talking to from his superior. "I'm afraid I have to advise against proceeding with this sale," he said quietly, looking between me and Claire. "Under the circumstances, I'm afraid the documents are too compromised to move forward." Claire stared at him, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't seem to know how to react. She had thought she could control this. She had thought she could play me for a fool, and now everything was falling apart around her. "You're not getting away with this," I repeated, my voice colder now, steel laced with finality. "You thought you could manipulate me, but you underestimated one thing, me." Diana stood up abruptly, her voice shaking. "This is not over, Jacob. You will regret this decision. You've ruined everything." I shook my head, letting out a low, controlled laugh. "No, Diana, you've ruined everything, and I'm just getting started." As I turned to leave, I felt the weight of the stuffed penguin in my briefcase, a reminder of the life I was protecting, the love I refused to let go of, and the fight I would never back down from. I wouldn't let them destroy Noah's legacy, not without a fight. They thought they could steal everything, but they had no idea what they had just awakened. This wasn't just about the house or the money. This was about justice. This was about redemption. And it was only the beginning that them was too overwhelming. They couldn't escape the truth. The fraud, the forged signatures, the secret accounts, they were all exposed, and no amount of manipulation could cover their tracks now. As the legal battle raged on, I stayed focused on the one thing that had brought me to this point, Noah. I refused to let his memory be tainted by their greed and deceit. Every document I pored over, every strategy Juan and Marcus developed, it all felt like I was doing this for him, for the life we should have had, the future they had tried to steal. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Claire's and Diana's world became smaller, their options fewer. Diana tried to rally support, spreading lies about me and the case, claiming I was out for revenge, but no one was buying it anymore. People started to see them for who they truly were, and the public pressure mounted. The media took notice as the fraud charges piled up, and soon enough, their once glorious reputation began to crumble. One afternoon, I sat in Marcus's office, going over the latest updates when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mia. "Brandon's flipped. He's ready to testify. He'll do whatever it takes to make sure Claire gets what's coming to her. You've won." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This isn't over yet," I said, but a small part of me allowed myself a moment of relief. With Brandon now on our side, their entire case was collapsing. The next week, Claire and Diana were summoned to court. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, they faced the consequences of their actions. As the courtroom doors opened and they walked in, their arrogance was gone. The confidence that had once radiated from them was replaced by a palpable unease. Diana's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, while Claire stood rigid, her face drawn tight in a mask of anger and fear. I sat quietly in the back, my mother by my side, a steady presence in the chaos. It felt surreal, watching them be dragged down by their own lies. The trial was long, the evidence stacked against them insurmountable. Brandon's testimony sealed their fate, exposing Claire's plans in chilling detail. In the end, Claire and Diana were convicted of fraud, theft, and conspiracy. They would face years of legal repercussions, their assets seized to repay the damages they had caused. Howard, too, was implicated, though his influence and connections meant that his punishment was less severe. But for the women who had torn my life apart, the consequences were harsh and final. As the judge delivered the sentence, I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't just about winning. It was about justice for Noah, for my family, and for everything they had tried to take from us. I had fought with everything I had, and I'd won. Walking out of the courthouse, the weight of the past few months finally seemed to lift. I wasn't free from the grief, not by a long shot. But the house was ours again, and with it, a piece of Noah's memory. It was time to rebuild, not just the house, but everything that had been destroyed. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder as we walked down the steps, her grip firm and reassuring. "You did it, Jacob. You brought justice." I nodded. The familiar weight of Noah's stuffed penguin in my briefcase, a constant reminder of what I had fought for. "I didn't just do it for me," I said quietly. "I did it for him." And as we walked into the future, I knew that no matter what came next, I would always have something to fight for. IT was in letting go. As I stood there in the cemetery, the weight of everything that had happened slowly started to lift. The pain, the betrayal, the legal battles, it all seemed to fade for a moment. In that silence, with my father beside me, I realized that the healing process wasn't just about facing the past head-on, but about making peace with it. The butterfly, delicate and free, was a symbol of that release. The freedom that comes with letting go of the anger and the need for retribution. We didn't need to hold on to the past any longer. The victory, though a hard one, wasn't as important as the love and strength Noah had left behind. The foundation I had set up in his memory wasn't just a financial gift to help others. It was a testament to his spirit, one of compassion, kindness, and a desire to make the world a better place, even in the face of adversity. I could finally see it. The way forward wasn't about proving anything to anyone or continuing the fight. It was about honoring Noah's legacy, living for those who were still here, and carrying with me the lessons of love and resilience. As my father and I walked away, a rare moment of clarity shining in his eyes, I felt the quiet comfort of knowing we were moving forward, not forgetting, but embracing the love that had come from all the pain. The storm had passed, and while the scars remained, they were no longer the dominant part of my story. And as we got into the car, I found myself smiling at the thought of Noah. He would be proud, not just of the foundation or the victory in the courtroom, but of the way I had finally learned to let go and find peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And for the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe again, knowing that Noah's spirit was with me, guiding me forward as I drove home with my father. The road ahead seemed less daunting, even though the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the back of my mind. Noah was gone, but his spirit had somehow woven itself into the fabric of my life, reminding me that even in the darkest times, love could persist, and healing was possible. The memories of him, like the penguin guarding his grave, and the way he had filled my life with warmth, now felt like the anchor I needed. He had taught me the value of resilience, of finding strength not in the pursuit of victory, but in the quiet moments of survival, of continuing to move forward. Even when the past seemed impossible to bear, the pancakes we were about to have weren't just about a simple meal. They symbolized something greater. It was a chance for my father and me to share a moment of normalcy amidst the chaos we had faced. The fact that he could remember Noah, even in his fragile state, was a small but precious victory in itself. As I glanced at him, his face lit up with a rare, unclouded joy. I realized that this was what mattered now, holding on to the love that had endured despite everything. It wasn't just about the fight or the triumph, but about the quiet moments of healing, the everyday life we could still share, and the future we could still build. And so, as we reached our home, the road before us no longer seemed as long. It wasn't about forgetting the pain or erasing the scars, but about finding peace and purpose in the love that would continue to guide us. Noah's legacy lived on, not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday acts of love and remembrance that would shape the rest of our lives. For the first time in a long time, it felt like enough.